Now it's time for our Sacramento as a Living Laboratory panel. Mark Rawson, Chief Operating Officer of the California Mobility Center, will moderate this discussion on how the city and our region can be a living laboratory to test not only new and innovative products, but also policies and business plans. Please welcome Mark and the panelists to the Zoom stage.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Laura and Sacramento Urban Technology Lab for inviting me to chair this panel session on Sacramento as a living laboratory. I think you set the context nicely for what we're trying to accomplish in the Sacramento region. And I wanted to introduce quickly our panelists for this session. And then I'm going to actually let each of them tell a little bit about themselves, and then we're going to jump into kind of a conversation about living laboratories, what it means, different components of it, etc. So I'm Mark Rawson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the California Mobility Center. I have about 25 years in clean technology research, development, and commercialization. Also on this panel today is Marc Dörfer. He's the Chief Operating Officer for PEmotion USA, a founding partner of the California Mobility Center. Mollie Cohen D'agostino is the Policy Director with the Three Revolutions Future Mobility Program at UC Davis. And Jaime Lemus is the Transportation and Climate Change Division Manager with the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District. And then last but not least, Garrett Brinker is Partnership Principal with VIA. So why don't we take just a couple minutes here for each of our panelists to introduce themselves and tell a little bit about themselves. And I will start with you, Marc Dörfer.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Mark, for the kind words and the kind introduction. Thank you, Laura and Jeff, for having me here today on this panel. It's super exciting what has been happening in Sacramento over the past 2 years now. I think has been 2 years since we started this project of the CMC. My name is Marc Dörfer. I am COO of PEmotion USA and also acting director for prototyping and commercialization at the CMC. So Mark and I work quite closely, quite a few hours a week, which gives quite a bit of confusion having two Marks in all the virtual calls. But yeah, what does PEmotion do in its core? We focus on realizing solutions for future mobility. And we do that in three ways. One of them is we offer consulting services and engineering services in a broad variety to a broad variety of clients. And we try to bring those clients together too. So it's startups, OEMs, and tier ones and twos, which we support with product development, process development, but also production development. So the full package from idea to serious production. And also cities and communities in creating concepts for sustainable mobility within their cities. The second thing is we are serious founders ourselves, so we try to be first on the market, learn and lead in the market, so that we can sell that knowledge to our partners and clients. And then last but not least, what brings us to this panel today is we build innovation ecosystems, meaning we build private-public partnerships. We create infrastructure as a service to kind of accelerate innovation as a holistic model. So that's where we come from. And yeah, as Mark said earlier, we're a founding partner of the CMC. So we were in there from the beginning. And PEmotion's also the place Monica and Jeff just, not Jeff, Neil just referenced to when they talked about their trip to Germany.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. And I know with COVID-19, we've been anxious to get our German colleagues back over here stateside. So I know it's in the middle of the night, and I appreciate you staying up late to support the discussion today. I want to introduce Mollie. Mollie, could you perhaps give a quick introduction to yourself and your role with the Three Revolutions Future Mobility Program at Davis?
Sure, happy to. So I'm Mollie Cohen D'agostino. I'm the Policy Director for the Three Revolutions Future Mobility Program at UC Davis. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, the Three Revolutions in transportation is a concept that was built about 4 years ago to focus on three pivotal forces that will radically transform mobility and accessibility. So we consider them to be automation, electrification, and shared mobility. And we can get into the discussion what we mean by those terms. So I guess the question that was asked is, what is our role in this California Mobility Center? So I am representing some of my colleagues. Paul Dodd, who sits on with UC Davis, sits on the CMC board. And my team at UC Davis, at the UC Davis Policy Institute and the Institute of Transportation Studies, plans to support the CMCs in providing technical guidance for participants, including for startups, to connect them to the policy tools and the research guidance that can help them to navigate the sort of often thorny mobility regulatory environment. And then our work is also so well aligned with the Sacramento Urban Technology Lab. I mean, the lab seems to embrace the concept behind the Three Revolution at its core. And so we applaud Mayor Steinberg and his fantastic team of innovative thinkers. We were involved in Atos as well. So we love to see that this is sort of growing and expanding the scope of Atos to continue to address some of the mobility challenges and innovations that we have at our disposal. I guess with that, I'll close my introductory remarks. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, and we'll touch a little bit about the importance of policy and regulation as it impacts the ability of a community like Sacramento to be a living lab and supporting startups in trying to reach their commercialization objectives. So I'm glad you're here to join us for that discussion. Jaime Lemus, would you please give us a few words about yourself and your role at the Air Quality Management District?
Sure thing. First off, just thank you everybody for the opportunity. Marc Dörfer, it's good to see you. It's been a while. I was one of the few that was able to go to Germany as well. And second of all, my name is Jaime Lemus, and it's all good. Jaime Lemus, and so I am the division manager for the Transportation and Climate Change division at the Sacramento Metro Air Quality Management District. And we have a few roles there that we cover in this division. One is related to land use, and as Rafe Porter spoke earlier in this presentation, as we address land use issues, because with transportation, it's not just about electrification or making zero emission mobility. It's about how the infrastructure also integrates with that. And the other component that I also oversee is the transportation side. And everybody really likes that side because that's the incentives component, right? Where we give out millions and millions of dollars every year. This year, we have a portfolio of about $35 million for transportation, zero emission and near zero emission mobility. And along with that too, I'm involved a lot with the elected officials in pushing zero emission within the Sacramento region. Of course, now, with the new executive order with Newsom's administration, that is going to be very, very relevant now, especially in this discussion in California and especially in Sacramento, because our team, always pushes me and prides themselves to be the most innovative air district in the region and in California. So now they have some teeth, that they have, and so they're going to be pushing a little more. So I'm very proud of this team, and I'll leave it at that for now. So thank you.
Thank you, Jaime. And yes, I think the governor has dropped the gauntlet, so to speak, on air districts and the private sector and the public sector coming together in a more collaborative way to reach this new goal for zero emission vehicles in the state. So I look forward to this discussion. Garrett Brinker, please give us a quick introduction to yourself and your company.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Laura and Jeff, for putting on this wonderful event. My name is Garrett Brinker. partnerships principal at VIA, and basically focus on creating new relationships, building relationships with cities and transit agencies and transportation operators, especially in the Western United States. And so VIA is really the world's leading provider of dynamic and on-demand transit systems. And our mission is really to work with transportation providers to make their systems more efficient, more convenient, and more accessible by leveraging modern advancements in technology. And so we got our start in 2012, serving as a small operator of shared rides in New York City, and have since grown to 175 services in 23 countries, providing more than 2 million rides per month. And our goal is really to build the digital infrastructure that truly powers public transit for all kinds of operators in mobility space, while partnering directly with city governments and public transit agencies and private operators. And we've really built software that's powerful and flexible enough to really meet a diverse number of use cases and create mobility solutions that are especially focused around shared rides. So we're focused on helping reduce vehicle miles traveled, helping reduce congestion, and helping reduce greenhouse gas emissions as well. And so our platform enables partners to digitize and efficiently manage every component of their transportation system, from on-demand public transit to solve first mile, last mile challenges and transit deserts, to fixed route transit to improve scheduling and efficiency, to paratransit and NEMT service to enable more accessible transportation, to more innovative solutions like deploying fleets of electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, and even enabling demand management software for dynamic tolling and road user charges. And well, one reason we're here today is that we currently have a couple on-demand microtransit partnerships in the Sacramento region. One with SacRT, which is actually the largest software as a service microtransit deployment in the country, and another one just down the road in West Sacramento as well.
Excellent, excellent. So a startup on our panel that has benefited from a living laboratory such as Sacramento, and we're going to touch a little bit more on that later in the discussion. So welcome to the discussion, Garrett. So maybe I'll start off by prodding the panel a little bit with some questions around living laboratories and why and what are they. How are they important to the commercialization process for startups, and maybe talk about kind of the experiences that folks have had in using living laboratories. And I guess I'll start with kind of the question around why, and I'm going to ask Jaime to maybe weigh in on this question and give me your thoughts on why do we need living laboratories like has been created here in Sacramento, that's being led by SUTL in the city. Why is that important for mobility innovation and commercialization?
This is, of course, one of my favorite topics. A lot of reasons why. First off, as Monica Hernandez mentioned earlier, we are at the front door of the Capitol. I mean, we are there. This is where innovative technology in the beginning can get its start, can influence policy, can get the attention of policymakers for two reasons. One, to open the door for trademark, commercialization, any of those barriers for companies to be able to get their start going, right? Two, funding, of course. That is another reason that it's very important, because when policymakers here at the Capitol see the innovative technology, but whether it's one of its kind, whether it's the first of the prototypes, get to see it in action, and then they become believers, right? I mean, we can see diagrams all day long, we can see proofs, but when you see it in action, it really makes a difference. And the two other sectors are the commercial, the fleet sectors. They are about reducing risk. And again, when you bring to them a prototype sketch or something, the fleets will say, no way, there's no way we're going to invest in this. We need to see it operate. Can it operate as our traditional vehicles? And if so, we're in, right? And then one of the sectors that has been touched on in the earlier panel is, aside from the fleets and the commercials, is the community. There has to be community buy-in. We mentioned, bike share and car share earlier, zero emission technology for passenger vehicles. But if the community still looks at it as space technology, then there is no way that they will embrace it. So a lot of reasons, and we could go on and on for all the reasons why, but those, I think, are some of the most important reasons why the Air District thinks it's important to have these living laboratories, so that we can point to the technology and say, see, it works. See, it is here. And this is what we want to bring to the fleets and to the communities for everybody, not just, the affluent community and not just the communities of need, but everybody in Sacramento region.
Yeah, and I like you bringing up, all the different constituents that need to play a role in a living laboratory. I mean, we've heard throughout today's discussion on the earlier panel on access, and then the fireside chat with Monica and Neil. For a successful living laboratory, you really need to have the community, you need to have the policy makers, the regulators, the private sector, and the public participants, all at the table collaborating to make these things successful and really demystify them, right? Demystify that this is not something that's far out in the future, that these are technologies, whether they be personal mobility, light duty, medium duty, heavy duty, transit oriented electrified technologies, that they're here, and in our region can play a critical role in giving startups that are working in the future mobility space a place to come prove out their technology and their business model in a very welcomed way, as we haven't seen in other areas around the country that have tried to do innovation and commercialization. I want to shift a little bit on that discussion and talk about what does it really take? What kind of ecosystem is needed to have a successful living laboratory? And I'm actually going to pick on you, Mark, based on your experience in Aachen and what was created there, and what we're trying to do to create a similar experience here in our region. I'd like you to talk a little bit about your perspective on what's needed to create such an ecosystem for a living laboratory in the Sacramento region.
Yeah, I think, like, when we talk of a successful living laboratory, it is or I would like to see it as a natural evolution of these innovation ecosystems we build up. So when I talk about an innovation ecosystem, I mean bringing together industry, academia, and government or governance under the same roof, and that's something that the CMC is going for, and that we've been doing for the past decade back here in Germany. And the players in that system, they only work together, or they would not naturally work together. So the main task is creating win-win relationships in these public-private partnerships. I mean, public-private partnerships have not always been the easiest partnerships to run. They need long-term commitment. They need to be able to pivot. Everybody needs to know what they're getting into. But if you can get that together, that's what creates a successful innovation ecosystem. And in that core, you kind of need the glue, somebody to take that lead role and saying, hey, we are the matchmaker. We see us. We've had some experience in all these fields, yeah. But our main mission is not to kind of run the whole business, but to bring the right people together to make those relationships worthy for each partner. And in Germany, PEM kind of took that role. In Sacramento, it was then SMUD taking the lead role in initiating the CMC. And if you have that core, that you can then build around that. And when I just said it's about getting industry and academia together, and why do we need those two players on the field? Is because if you can manage to be first in principle via the academic institutions, via basic research, but also applied research. And then you can transfer this position of being first in principle and being first in market by feeding it directly to the industry. You gain a huge momentum in that acceleration process, because both can learn from each other. The academic side can learn what the industry needs, and the industry can learn what comes out of out of the labs and the universities. And the next benefit is, we talked about this earlier, is talent. So you're not gonna succeed without that fresh, new-minded talent in that future market. So once you have those shifted around the core, the next thing you need is a collaborative mindset. So an ecosystem only works with the mindset. And I'm not just talking about a couple of startups, maybe getting together over some draft beer or some craft beer in the evening and talking about their ideas. I'm talking about big players, OEMs, tier ones, and startups all working together and kind of opening up to open innovation, being more collaborative on this journey. And obviously, I think Neil said it earlier in the discussion, hardware development especially is really hard. So you have to get through that. I think he said valley of death, and I like that analogy. But you need money, you need some capital, and that's really hard to raise as a hardware startup, because investors want to see a good prototype to give you money, but a good prototype already costs you a lot of money.
Right.
So you need an infrastructure that kind of helps you de-risk those first investments, and to take that risk out of having to go out there and use your first bunch of money you get in to invest into expensive equipment or expensive materials, expensive services. So if you create a win-win relationship again, where bigger players, how Alan put it, startups would not actually get to, that they also can get a win out of helping these startups early on.
Right.
That's where that early stage idea gets traction. And last but very much not least, it's about testing that idea, and to that what Jaime said, is creating acceptance, because no innovation is going to succeed without acceptance from the market, from the citizens, from the users. And that's where living labs then as a natural evolution of this ecosystem come into place, because it means not only on a macro level having an organized stakeholder structure that allows open innovation. It also means breaking it down all the way to the micro level, where you target specific individual groups in testing your product, but the actual living, or the actual benefit of a living lab, happens in the middle area, in the meso area, where you combine open innovation with user innovation and make the user part of the innovation. So you try to get everybody involved in that innovation process, and that's where living labs actually have their main benefit. And that only happens through the right policies and regulations in place to actually make that happen in a real world environment. But I think we have a better expert to talk on policies than me right now.
Yeah, I mean, but to your point, I mean, when you create that kind of environment of a living laboratory, you accelerate commercialization, because you have all the important stakeholders or constituents working together in an environment where, they are trying to, help those new innovative products succeed. And I applaud the City of Sacramento, because, they've raised their hand to be a city that's going to be open to, clean tech and in the mobility space, and in the context of this discussion. As you know, in our discussions with, industry players, as we were, formulating the CMC, there was a lot of discussions about areas around the country that, it's not an easy place for startups to go into, because there's just not that local government support to be a living laboratory and to let these startups come in and test these new ideas, these new products, technologies, and business models, on the city streets, with the residents and other key stakeholders in our community. So I applaud the City of Sacramento for raising their hand to be an innovator. But that actually ties back to, kind of the role of policy and regulation, and, how does policy, enable and guide these types of initiatives like living laboratories? And I'm gonna ask Mollie maybe to speak about the role of policy as an enablement for living laboratories and commercialization of new innovative technologies.
Yeah, it's an important question. Thank you. And so much of what Mark said really tees up this question so well, because this connectivity between academia and the industry. There's also, I really do see the role of the UC Davis Policy Institute in our work is this connective tissue between the policymaker, the regulatory space, and the researchers, often whom are really speaking different languages. And I think we all are really speaking different languages. And I think that why the CMC is so important is the goal is to break down silos. And the goal is to, think about how we can better improve communications between these different stakeholders. But I think a bigger picture, I think the policy is a huge driver for change. The pathway I loved what Monica said about that, that this idea that government should, is ready to partner but not be a barrier, right? Mm-hmm. Finally, we're seeing governments really shifting their mindset of looking towards proven solutions to really thinking of themselves as innovators. And I think we need to seize on that. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Obviously, state and federal policy, really, if we need proof, the proof is there already. We've seen the policy stoke the electric vehicle market, right? And since 2010, we've seen electric vehicle sales raised by 1,800%. And California being the state with half the total electric vehicles in the whole country. And that wasn't, that was the direct result of a state leadership in the ZEV mandate, the zero emission vehicle mandate, that put pressure on the industry to sell vehicles here, and stoke that market, get it the flame, going. We're still sort of in that early stage, so that the stoking will need to continue in the electric vehicle side, and we can of course talk about that for a whole panel. But it's really exciting to see that the governor has again stepped in to set another, relatively ambitious benchmark. I'll say not 2035 is our goal, right? To sell exclusively sell zero emission vehicles. And of course that aligns with China's and UK's goal. It's a little bit less ambitious than Norway or Ireland or Iceland, but we're moving in the right direction, and we're joining the world in pushing the envelope on electric vehicles, and that required policy. On the passenger side, it will, we've got a lot of room to move. We've got 70% of commuters in California. That number may be higher before the pandemic that drove single occupancy vehicles to work. We're going to see telecommuting rise after the pandemic winds down, fingers crossed, but we're also going to see a lot of other people that took other modes, took transit, moving towards single occupant vehicles. So we really need to be prepared. And I've seen SACOG and other public sector public sector voices speaking to this important role of using this pandemic as an opportunity to encourage a transition towards new innovative modes. But on that demand side, on that passenger demand side, we have a lot of, there's a huge role for policy. We need to send the right price signals to people, saying that single occupant vehicles are not the way to get to work. Right now, that's the cheapest way. So of course, that's what people do. We need to change those price signals, and that requires state, federal, and local policy. So I think on the innovation side, you can create, I think we talked about this a little bit before, but you can create the coolest app or the most amazing scooter. But if you don't have the right policies in place, people are going to drive, because that is the easiest and cheapest thing we have to do right now. So the ecosystem includes leveraging Sacramento policymakers and of course our local leaders. So it's an important role.
Yeah, thank you. I mean I was involved in the early EV mandate back in the 90s, and there is a mentality change, I have to say, in discussions with automakers back then and today in us establishing the CMC. I mean, there's a mind change from the OEM side about the inevitability of electrification of transportation. And I think, that it just speaks to the time is right. The time is right for, our community to be a living laboratory, to help embrace these new technologies. I feel like the industry is there now and realizes that, there is a market here for this. And I think you're right. I think the policies that have been pursued here in the state of California have created that environment for that realization to happen. And whether it be on the manufacturing side with the OEMs or on the customer side, looking at the viability of electrification of transportation. But I agree with you that it's more than just the personal vehicle. We also need to start addressing mobility beyond the vehicle. It needs to be more of a discussion around future mobility and business models around other types of services that can deliver mobility beyond certainly the typical folks that have benefited from electrification to date. And the panel earlier talking about access and equity is an important part of that. I want to shift gears a little bit and now actually ask you, Garrett, to give us some thoughts about the concept of a living laboratory and from your perspective as a user, your experience in participating in Sacramento's Living Laboratory, and give us some of your perspectives on the value that living laboratories provide startups such as yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a living laboratory, this concept is so incredibly important because it brings together. It creates these structures. I think Mark and Mollie have especially said it so well, is that it creates these structures to be able to test something, but also to be able to, I think what's very important in these labs, and when you have folks from the nonprofit and the academic sector who are involved, it's starting to actually think about the goals of these services as well. And I think something that in the absence of some of these structures, we're often not thinking about who we're trying to serve and what are the goals of that service. And I think that's been something that's been so incredibly important in the work that we have done in Sacramento. We've been working mostly with Sacramento Regional Transit District and partnered to launch the Smart Ride microtransit service, which is an on-demand transit service for Sacramento residents. To Mollie's point, to Mollie talking about policy and funding, the service was and is funded through Measure A, which provides funding countywide for improvements to the transportation system. And so Sacramento Transportation Authority awarded SacRT a $12 million grant to really help expand microtransit throughout the community and throughout the region. And what was a service that was previously powered by another competitor across 2 zones, that then enabled us to expand the zone into 9 different zones across the entire region. The fleet includes 45 shuttle buses that are equipped to accommodate people with disabilities, 9 of which are electric vehicles as well. And so this is the combination of policy, the combination of funding, and then the combination of really starting to define goals and objectives was very important. To the point around just goals and objectives, this is a very equitable service and really provides a lifeline to communities with populations that's approximately about 50% minority, 15% low income, 13% disabled, and a number of the zones that we operated in, 3 zones, consists of more than 80% disadvantaged populations. And this was a huge goal for both SacRT and other folks that we worked with within the community to ensure that we're providing access to underserved communities, better access to jobs and educational opportunities, and everyday needs like groceries and critical services like access to medical facilities. And I think something that was particularly important in defining those goals and objectives was the real focus on, we started with focusing on user experience. We didn't just start focusing on how can we best grow ridership as quickly as possible. There was a real focus, and Sacramento and SacRT understood that from the beginning, we really needed to ensure that this was the best customer experience possible. And that means you need to really understand the community in which you're within. And so that included tailoring our service zones to meet the needs of those specifically in that area, deciding whether we would offer, say, door-to-door service or a curb-to-curb service, adjusting service parameters like wait times and average length of trip, and how far you might need to walk to what's considered a virtual bus stop in this on-demand service, and working specifically with those initial users and rapidly iterating and gathering feedback and being constant communication with our city partners, and methodically building that user base. And that's how we really could ensure that this tech-forward solution could be deployed in an equitable way across a community.
So I guess as a follow-up, Garrett, I mean, based on your experience in our living laboratory, I mean, what are the things in your mind that made it successful for you? And maybe touch on a few of the things that were hard, that going forward, things like lessons learned that we could get from the concept of a living laboratory that we can improve upon to make Sacramento's living laboratory more appealing to more startups.
Yeah. First, I'll hit again that made it successful was SacRT really focused and honed in on what their mission was. What do they want to accomplish, and so focus on the equitable components of that. Also, the goal of defining that they wanted to holistically improve the rider experience as well. I think this was particularly important because this was not seen as something that was just off to the side. It was not this new tech innovative thing that you could just launch and let it go. The one way in which SacRT measures success of the system is by measuring success of ridership per hour across all modes of transportation. Because first, they didn't want, say, this service to cannibalize other public transit services. Frankly, something that we don't want either. Want to build solutions that augment and enhance and grow public transit. And so by thinking about that, by having an ecosystem, by having a living laboratory that enables really, the ability to think about something more holistically and sort of think about this service more holistically, knowing that this concept of mobility and public transit is this interconnected web of modes and use cases that often have riders that have multiple legs of trips and need to need to go through multiple modes in order to accomplish or to get to their destination. That was a really important component of those efforts as well. I think something that's just more is more difficult, but I think we've overcome quite well in Sacramento is that with a technological solution, you're going to be focused a lot around change management. A lot of the hardest parts of the work that we do is ensuring that all of the resources are in place, from the public sector, the private sector, to everyone in between, to really ensure that folks who are using a new type of innovative mobility solution know how to use it through marketing efforts, through on-the-ground community engagement, through really leveraging the trust that the city and other folks within a living laboratory who are on the ground every day, really leveraging that trust and empowering the city and folks who are on the ground with the necessary resources to educate people on a new or evolved service. And so that is changing that mindset around how you might have previously used a transit system to what might exist today or what might exist in the future. Certainly a challenge, but is something we've worked hard to overcome with the partners who are on the ground and are part of this living laboratory.
Yeah, and I think the nice part about what's happening in Sacramento is I think there's a mindset. There's a mindset to be willing to, you know, try these new technologies and involve, you know, all the different key constituents that need to be a part of that technology success in order for us to reach success with the public policy goals that are driving us to pursue these technologies, whether they be access, air quality, or other environmental benefits. I think we only have maybe a minute left, Laura. So I'd like to give, you know, the panelists a couple of seconds or so, maybe to give us some closing thoughts on living laboratories, if possible, Laura.
Yeah, we can, let's take a quick minute, so.
Okay. So why don't we go around and we'll start with ladies first. Mollie, maybe give us some closing thoughts about living laboratories and what we're doing in Sacramento.
Well, sure. Well, I'll just say that, you know, hearing, you know, from Garrett, and I just want to applaud VIA for being just, you know, the right type of innovation, and really doing a successful job of partnering with the public sector. And I think that's the kind of innovation we want to support, right? And I think that the government can choose, you know, and you know, can choose to some degree some winners and losers in this space, right? And we want to choose, we want to make successful the ones that are mission driven and align with public objectives. So I think that, you know, for the startups that want to just make a ton of money, well, great, they can do it on their own. But if they want to do something that is mission driven, then maybe we have to support them in doing that. So I think that's a thing I'll take away from this.
Great, thank you. Jaime, do you have any closing thoughts about Sacramento's Living Laboratory?
I do, and you know, we touched on a lot of things. You know, one, the policymakers all have to be aligned. You know, the agency leads have to be aligned, and I think we're seeing that now. You know, I know that many of them have breakfast together now, and so at the executive level, we're all meeting together, so we're all very much aligned. So this I know we're moving all in the right direction. I did see a question on the Q&A about electrification, so let's not forget hydrogen. You know, hydrogen is also another component that we didn't even touch on, but it is another transportation solution, especially when we talk about balancing the electric grid now, right? And then the final thoughts on this is, you know, 2 years ago, we deployed 29 electric school buses, and that was a massive, massive accomplishment for Sacramento. And at the same time, it was only 29. You know, and so it was a massive effort. I'm very proud of everybody. But here on the screen, we have all the players that can make 29 be exponential now. I mean, everybody aligned, policymakers aligned, startup companies aligned with the CMC. I mean, and we just have so much opportunity. So let's make that happen.
Thank you. That's a great call to action. Mark, I'm going to give you just a couple seconds for some closing thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Maybe one thought just around, we talked about all the benefits of living labs, and we circled around one of them, but we didn't really put our finger on that, and that is the ability of living labs to really give the power back to the citizens and the users to actually generate bottom-up projects in the economy, in the communities, meaning that we can create new markets, or everybody's actively involved in innovation, and therefore we can create new markets because it's easy to innovate, because you already have a setting, you're ready to go, you have a pathway, or you have people who help you down that pathway. And the second thing I just want to touch on is, Neil said there's so much more possibilities in California and in Sacramento, and this panel was about living labs in Sacramento. And I think that's really due to the policy that is already in place. In Germany, it's more like we have a lot of innovative companies, and they really have to convince the policymakers to make that next step. What I'm experiencing when I'm working in California is the policymakers are actually pushing the market and pulling from the technology side, where in Germany we're seeing it the other way around. And I really like that, and that's why I think Sacramento makes a great bet for a living lab.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Garrett, maybe some closing thoughts, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Laura.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, I think now more than ever, we're realizing how crucial it is to build safe, efficient, convenient, cleaner forms of mobility. But we really need, as we accelerate our efforts in that, we need these, at one point physical and now all digital forums to provide the space for all of us to come together and co-create, because we'll be able to solve our greatest mobility challenges more quickly, more effectively, and especially to ensure that no one is left behind. And I think the most important part of this revolution in mobility is the shift from thinking about how to most efficiently move the most amount of cars to how to most efficiently move the most amount of people. And moving the most amount of people starts with deeply understanding people's transit choices and preferences, and really building better and more efficient and perhaps even more delightful mobility experiences. And I really think Sacramento is making some really great steps forward in doing that.
Great, thank you for that. I want to thank all of our panelists for an interesting discussion, and I hope we get to do this again soon, because there's so many things happening in Sacramento relative to innovation and technology and mobility, and this is just the beginning. So it'll be exciting to see where we are in a couple years' time. So thank you very much.